He uses research and science and statistics to narrow down who he believes the suspect is in the Nancy Guthrie abduction.
There is still no named suspect, even after 74 days, despite the FBI having reviewed tens of thousands of tips. Investigators do, however, possess critical evidence. DNA recovered from inside the house, blood on the porch confirmed to be Nancy Guthrie's, and footage showing a figure stepping onto that porch with a level of stillness that seems unnatural for someone committing such an act. On day 74, a researcher analyzed the case using data, producing not a theory or accusation, but a statistical profile. What emerged from that analysis is more disturbing than anything publicly released so far. This profile represents the professional opinion of a forensic expert, based entirely on data, and does not identify any individual. It is simply what the statistics indicate. On that same day, NewsNation correspondent Brian Enton, who has been reporting from Tucson throughout the case, spoke with forensic researcher Dr. Gary Brucato. His work focuses on decades of peer-reviewed research into violent crime in the United States, examining who commits these acts, why they do so, and what behavioral evidence reveals about them. Dr. Brucato holds a doctorate from the New School for Social Research in New York City and previously served as assistant director at the Center of Prevention and Evaluation at Columbia University Irving Medical Center and the New York State Psychiatric Institute. There, he conducted research on early psychosis, violence risk, and the behavioral and psychiatric characteristics of violent offenders. He also co-created the Columbia Mass Murder Database, a comprehensive study of mass murder cases worldwide from 1900 to 2019, analyzing patterns across more than a century. With over 50 peer-reviewed publications, ongoing teaching and consulting work within the City University of New York System, a private clinical practice in New York City, and his current role as a visiting scholar at Boston College alongside Dr. and Burgess, one of the most influential figures in criminal profiling, his analysis stands as the most detailed, structured, and significant assessment this case has publicly received so far. Dr. and Burgess began consulting with the FBI's Behavioral Science Unit at Quantico in 1978, contributing to the foundational research that shaped modern offender profiling. Working alongside agents such as John Douglas and Robert Ressler, she participated in interviews with some of the most violent offenders in American history. Today, she continues teaching at Boston College's Connell School of Nursing and leads a network of forensic professionals. Her Super Sleuth Group, which regularly collaborates with former FBI profilers and cold case specialists to analyze unsolved investigations. It is within this professional environment that Dr. Gary Brucato operates. When he examines the Nancy Guthrie case, he is not offering speculation, but applying a methodology grounded in decades of academic research, clinical practice, and direct involvement with complex violent crimes. His conclusions are built on frameworks repeatedly tested against real-world cases and evidence. His analysis begins not with the footage or the crime scene, but with a statistical baseline. Between 76% and 92% of homicide victims in the United States knew their killer, with a higher end of that range applying specifically to female victims, meaning that 9 out of 10 women are killed by someone familiar to them. This figure, drawn from multiple strands of published academic research, reflects a consistent pattern rather than a single study. Brucato does not present this as proof in Guthrie's case, but as the base rate, the probabilistic starting point for any disciplined investigation. Before examining behavior or evidence, this statistic reframes the central question. Not whether the perpetrator could be a stranger, but what direction is most statistically likely. When this baseline is considered alongside the behavior captured in the doorbell footage, the analysis becomes more focused. From a biological and physiological standpoint, approaching a stranger's home at night with the intent to commit a violent act would typically trigger a stress response, elevated heart rate, increased cortisol, heightened alertness, and visible behavioral cues such as hesitation or environmental scanning. Even experienced offenders tend to display signs of stress in unfamiliar, high-risk situations. These signals often appear on camera, even when identity is concealed. However, in this case, none of those indicators are evident. The individual's movement on the porch appears calm, controlled, and deliberate, with no visible urgency or hesitation. This consistent behavioral pattern, noted by investigators and reinforced in Dr. Brucato's analysis, points toward a single defining characteristic in the subject's demeanor. The individual captured on the porch appears calm and composed, neither nervous nor hurried, showing none of the urgency typical of someone afraid of being seen. There is no frantic scanning for unknown variables, only a steady, controlled presence that suggests familiarity with the location, the door, and what lies beyond it. Interpreting this behavioral pattern through a statistical lens, Dr. Gary Brucato reaches a directional conclusion. The level of comfort strongly indicates that the person likely knew Nancy Guthrie in some capacity. This does not necessarily imply a close or personal relationship. The connection could be minimal, indirect, or even one-sided, someone who knew far more about her than she knew about them. Such a person could range from individuals with intimate knowledge of her life to those who had routine, limited access to her home, such as contractors, service workers, or maintenance personnel who may have observed the property, its layout, and her daily patterns. It could also include individuals from places she frequented, her church, restaurants, or medical facilities, or even someone connected to her through another person. Statistically, this scenario points away from a random stranger and toward a targeted act, one that required prior knowledge of her environment, schedule, and routines. That level of awareness implies an existing connection, meaning there is likely someone within the broader circle of her life who holds relevant information but has not yet come forward. Beyond the absence of visible stress, Dr. Brucato identifies a more specific behavioral implication. The subject's demeanor aligns with what he describes as a psychopathic character structure. In clinical terms, this does not refer to randomness, lack of control, or the exaggerated portrayals often seen in popular culture. Instead, it describes an individual whose emotional processing and behavioral responses differ fundamentally from the norm. Someone who can engage in high-risk actions without displaying the physiological stress or anxiety typically expected, even among experienced offenders. This behavioral profile points to an individual who does not experience fear, guilt, empathy, or social restraint in the way most people do. The internal warning system that typically acts as a deterrent, the sense of dread or moral hesitation before committing a violent act, is either significantly reduced or entirely absent. In this case, the figure on the porch is engaging in behavior that would normally trigger clear physiological stress responses, approaching a private residence at night with the intent to take someone from inside. Yet instead of visible distress, the person moves with calm, control, and deliberate stillness. According to Dr. Gary Brucato, this is not incidental, it is diagnostically meaningful. He is not assigning a clinical diagnosis based on footage alone, but applying a behavioral framework to a specific and observable absence of stress where it should reliably appear, drawing an inference grounded in decades of research on offender behavior. That inference carries direct implications. A psychopathic character structure does not suddenly appear in a single moment. It develops over time and reveals itself through repeated patterns of behavior. Individuals with this structure almost always have prior histories of antisocial or criminal activity, even if not at the level of violent abduction. Extreme acts rarely occur without earlier, lower-level expressions of the same underlying traits. A person capable of acting with such composure under these conditions has likely lived with this behavioral pattern for years, leaving traces in past interactions with law enforcement, employers, neighbors, family members, or institutions. These patterns, when viewed retrospectively in light of what occurred in the Catalina foothills on February 1st, would likely form a consistent and recognizable trajectory. This suggests that the individual is not an unknown entity with no prior footprint, but someone who has already come to the attention of others or existing systems. Their history may already exist within law enforcement databases or within networks of people who have encountered them before. Someone, somewhere, may recognize this behavioral description and be able to associate it with a specific individual. For that reason, the FBI's appeal for information extends beyond those with direct knowledge of the crime itself. It also includes anyone who has known someone whose past behavior aligns with this profile. Such information, particularly when reconsidered in hindsight, could be critical in advancing the investigation. From this behavioral analysis also emerges a key question. Why Nancy Guthrie? She was not a public figure with heightened security, nor a younger or physically resilient target. She was 84 years old, living alone, with limited mobility and ongoing medical needs, including a pacemaker. At the same time, her family's public profile may have suggested certain assumptions about financial circumstances. Within forensic research, elderly individuals living alone are a recognized category of targeted victims in violent crime, making her selection consistent with known patterns rather than random chance. Elderly individuals living alone present a distinct operational profile that certain offenders are systematically drawn to: predictable routines, limited ability to physically resist, and reduced capacity to seek help during a critical moment. Their residential environments can often be approached without raising suspicion, especially by individuals whose presence appears legitimate: contractors, delivery drivers, home health aides, or other service workers who can observe the home and its occupant without triggering concern. Nancy Guthrie aligned closely with this profile. At 84 years old, living alone with severely limited mobility, reportedly unable to walk even short distances independently, her daily life followed consistent and observable patterns, including regular church attendance and family gatherings. Her home, located in a quiet residential neighborhood, combined with her public identity as the mother of a well-known media figure, may have allowed others to infer details about her family's financial capacity and potential willingness to respond to a threat. If the motive behind the crime involved financial leverage, as the available evidence suggests, then her selection was likely the result of deliberate evaluation rather than chance. This implies a process of observation and information gathering over time, requiring proximity and some form of prior connection. Building on this, Dr. Gary Brucato introduces a further dimension to the analysis: the likelihood that more than one individual was involved. He suggests that the person seen in the doorbell footage may not be acting alone, but instead represents only one role within a coordinated effort. Using a simple analogy, he describes the visible individual as the waiter, while another unseen figure operates as the chef. In this framework, the waiter is the one exposed to view. The person who approaches the door carries out the immediate task and assumes the physical risk captured on camera. However, this individual is not the planner. The chef, who remains entirely unseen, is responsible for designing the operation, selecting the target, determining the timing, and understanding the environment in detail. This includes knowledge of surveillance systems, such as the placement of cameras, how to approach without capturing usable footage, and whether additional recording devices might exist inside the home. The precision of the timing, down to the specific early morning hour, along with the apparent familiarity with the property, suggests a level of planning and coordination that extends beyond a single actor and points toward a structured, premeditated effort. Within this framework, the unseen chef is responsible for structuring the entire operation, including the critical 41-minute window: what needed to happen within that time, in what sequence, and what contingencies were in place if something went wrong. This role involves solving logistical challenges far beyond what is visible from the porch. Supporting this interpretation, Savannah Guthrie revealed in a Today Show interview that when the family arrived, the rear doors of the home were found propped open, not forced or damaged, but intentionally held open. Initially, this created confusion, leading them to wonder if Nancy had experienced a medical emergency and that paramedics had entered the home. However, this detail ultimately pointed to something far more deliberate. Propping open a rear door requires prior knowledge of its existence and a decision made in advance to use it as part of the plan, whether as an entry point, exit route, or operational necessity. This is not the action of someone improvising in an unfamiliar environment, but of someone executing a premeditated plan based on familiarity with the property. In Dr. Gary Brucato's analysis, this reinforces the presence of an individual who understood the home in detail: its layout, camera placements, Nancy Guthrie's routines, physical condition, and even the technology within the house. Such knowledge would have been gathered over time through access, observation, or some form of connection to someone who had that access. While public attention has largely focused on the figure captured on the porch, Brucato's perspective shifts the focus away from that visible actor. The individual on camera represents the execution of the crime, not its origin. The true source lies with the unseen planner, the person whose familiarity with Nancy's life made the operation possible. This person would not appear suspicious in ordinary settings and may have interacted with others in ways that only seem significant in hindsight. Additionally, a key investigative step that has received limited public attention is the decision to subject a recovered glove to genealogical DNA analysis. This method gained national prominence in identifying the Golden State Killer, who was eventually traced through public genealogy databases and identified as Joseph James DeAngelo after decades of evading capture. By applying this same approach, investigators may be able to connect biological evidence from the case to a broader family network, potentially uncovering the identity of the person responsible through indirect genetic links. Genealogical DNA analysis operates differently from traditional database matching. Instead of requiring a direct match within criminal records, it works by identifying genetic relatives, building outward through family connections, and narrowing down to a specific individual using a combination of genealogy, geographic data, and conventional investigative methods. The decision to apply this technique to the glove recovered near Nancy Guthrie's home suggests that standard database searches either produced no viable match or failed to identify a clear suspect. It also indicates that investigators believe the DNA evidence on the glove is strong enough to justify the more complex and time-intensive genealogical approach, one that does not depend on the individual having a prior criminal record. At the same time, the presence of mixed DNA inside the home introduces additional forensic complexity, requiring careful separation and analysis of multiple contributors. While this process takes time, DNA evidence remains stable, and advances in technology continue to increase its investigative value, as seen in past cases like the identification of the Golden State Killer. Dr. Gary Brucato's behavioral analysis adds a layer of prioritization to this forensic work. If the offender fits the profile he outlines, particularly one involving a psychopathic character structure, there is a meaningful likelihood of prior criminal or antisocial behavior, which increases the chances that their DNA may already exist in some form within law enforcement systems. Genealogical analysis serves as a parallel path if no direct match is found. From there, Brucato extends his analysis to what most likely occurred during the 41 minutes inside the home, outlining two primary scenarios. In the first, the abduction was staged from the outset to resemble a kidnapping, with ransom demands and communication serving as deliberate misdirection to create the illusion of a financial motive and buy time. In the second, the kidnapping was genuine but failed due to unforeseen complications, possibly related to Nancy's age, health, or resistance, forcing those involved to alter their plan. In this scenario, the victim may have become no longer viable for the intended purpose, leading to a critical shift in decision-making. Additional expert perspectives support the possibility that events inside the home did not unfold as planned. Observations about the physical evidence, including blood patterns that do not clearly account for Nancy's disappearance, raise unresolved questions about what happened next. Brucato's broader conclusion, however, remains cautious and probabilistic. He does not assert a definitive outcome but notes that, based on statistical patterns associated with similar offender profiles, if Nancy Guthrie is deceased, the likelihood of recovering intact remains low. This assessment is not presented as a conclusion about her fate, but as a probability derived from established research on offenders who exhibit this level of planning, control, and behavioral consistency. Such individuals tend to apply the same level of precision used in committing the crime to eliminating evidence afterward. Ultimately, this analysis does not solve the case but narrows its focus. It suggests that the person responsible is likely not a stranger, may have a prior behavioral or criminal history, and may not have acted alone. It highlights the likelihood of an unseen planner whose knowledge and preparation made the crime possible, and whose presence may exist in ordinary interactions remembered by others. The investigation remains active, with no named suspect, a substantial reward in place, and ongoing efforts by both law enforcement and Nancy Guthrie's family. The framework presented here emphasizes that the answer may already exist within someone's knowledge or memory, waiting to be recognized and reported.